about one of these books that I'm not gonna name, and I don't think that that video needs to see the light of day. And I'm like, bitch, shut the f up. Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am Leandra, the TBR0, and today I thought that I would give a mid-month January wrap-up on my monthly TBR, especially as I was looking back on my January TBR video. I realized that I had 9 books on said TBR, which is about 2 times the number of books that I usually read for the month. Fortunately, I'm on track, which is great, and it helps that this month I haven't started school yet. I have classes starting at the end of January. If I were to do a full wrap-up of all these books at the end of January, the video would be so long, and I'm already worried about how long this video is going to be, especially since I'm still a bit fired up about some of the reads and excited about others. And originally, I intended to do a video vlog kind of setup for this video. However, I don't know how other YouTubers do it because my emotional radar was all over the place every time I finished a book, and I did attempt to do this as a video vlog originally, and there's still an 8 or 9 minute rant videotaped at about 1 a.m. at the beginning of the month about one of these books that I'm not going to name, and I don't think that that video needs to see the light of day. And I'm like, shut the f up. Yeah. But without further ado, I am going to discuss these books in the order that I read them. I just think that makes sense. And then I can also see my emotional journey as I was reading them. So the first book on my TBR that I finished was the final revival of Opal and Nev by Donnie Walton. Now in this book, I was mostly intrigued because a friend of mine really found the storyline interesting, and she wanted to know what my thoughts were on the ending. And that's important to know because, to be honest, I probably wouldn't have finished the book if it hadn't have been for my friend wanting to know what my thoughts were. And if you saw my January TBR video, you might have thought that the reason why I didn't like this book was because I'm not really a fan of fictional story arcs for musicians. And actually, that was fine. I mean, I kind of glossed over the certain lyrics or the paragraph long descriptions of like what the music sounds like, because again, I just also don't think I can cope with not knowing what the music actually does sound like. For instance, if I had a nonfiction book about a musician and they were discussing a certain song, I could literally go and listen to that song so that I know what they're talking about. Whereas with a book like this, you never fully grasp what the song is supposed to sound like. But I digress. So I actually was fine with the music. What I didn't like was that I didn't know who to root for, to be honest. I am a character-driven reader, and so I really need to be rooting for the right people in regards to, like, you know, not necessarily who the good guys and the bad guys are. I don't care if you're a gray character. However, I don't like it if you're a gray character, but our author or narrator is telling us that they actually aren't gray, that they're good characters, that they're righteous, and that really is what pisses me off. So with Opal and Nev, I understood and agreed with the reasons why I shouldn't root for Nev. There are some really serious issues that go down, and so I was totally on board for rooting against him. With Opal, though, I felt like I was encouraged to like her, to root for her, and I just didn't. And I'll get into that in a second, but it's quite interesting to compare Opal and Nev, especially their personalities, since they literally were like the same person in regards to how selfish they were at times, especially when they were pushing their own career and their own agendas. And yet again, completely different expectations, at least I think from the author, where we were expected to not like Nev and expected to like Opal. There are moments where I do like Opal. I love her when she's, got the excerpts in interviews or in appearances on TV shows, especially the scene where she's on Cavett, I believe it's called, and that was brilliant. I loved all of her cameos as an activist, especially for women's rights, for Black women's rights, and that was great. I just didn't like her when it came to how she handled herself when it came to personal, intimate situations within her personal circle of friends and family. For instance, the book follows Sunny, who is, at the top of her career. She is an editor for Oral magazine, which focuses on music and everything else. And she actually was the first Black woman editor for this magazine. So it's just, an obviously amazing feat for her. And so her first big project was following Opal and Nev. And she has a very personal connection to this band, and it's mainly because her father, Jimmy, was the original drummer for the band, and he tragically died in a racially charged riot, which we know at the beginning of the book. However, through the interviews that she conducts, we slowly piece together what happened both before the riot and in the events after it. Her personal connection goes a bit further than just the fact that her father was in the band. It was very well known to everyone that Opal was Jimmy's mistress, and Jimmy's wife at the time is Sunny's mother. And infidelity is a common trope. It's something that you just deal with in literature. It happens in real life, so it makes sense that it would be a common obstacle for characters to have to get over in certain books. If we really want to get into it, Min Jin Lee's first novel, Free Food for Millionaires, has so much infidelity in it. Some of them more justified than others in regards to the story arcs, but that was, that was fine. I believe that book was a 4-star read for me, so I really enjoyed that book. So I don't think it's an issue that I am totally against infidelity in books and that it's a personal problem for me when I say that I didn't like the fact that this infidelity occurred in this book. Basically, while Opal and Jimmy are together, at one point, out of the blue, Jimmy says, "Hey, we have to stop doing this because now my wife's pregnant." So that just is so skeevy and disgusting, the fact that he basically was being intimate with both women, and he's unapologetic about it. There's really no discussion about how morally wrong that is, especially when, really throughout the entire book, his wife, Sunny's mother, along with Sunny, are almost indirect victims or silent victims throughout this entire story, and it's their voices and their justice that I wanted to see, because her mother has to deal with the embarrassment of that scandal, on top of the fact that he was killed in such a horrific way. So it's just, and also how unapologetic or unempathetic Opal was about the situation, especially at times when Sunny finally did stand up for herself and want some answers, and at least to want to voice the issues that she had to grow up dealing with, because we learn later on in the book that her and her mother still don't have a very strong relationship, and it does seem to go back to the events that went on with Jimmy and Opal, which really annoyed me. That was the one thing, is I rooted for Sunny the entire time, but it frustrated me how passive she was, especially when it came to her idol, Opal, which was also a complicated relationship. The fact that Opal was one of her idols, and also a woman whose actions ended up causing her trauma and problems in her childhood, but that's its own thing. There's a few moments, especially when it comes to conversations between Sunny and Virgil, where Sunny, is being upfront and honest about certain transgressions that Opal has done. And 2 moments, but one that really, really annoyed me was the fact that he, snaps back at Sunny saying,
"Oh, it's funny how you are using that education that Opal paid for to then question her heart."
And I was like, shut the fuck up. First of all, that money was to make Opal feel better, because that was her way of basically apologizing to Sunny's mother, because she felt she owed Sunny's mother. So that's the end of the transaction. The fact that Sunny got an education for that, that doesn't mean she owes Opal anything. What annoyed me was after he said that, Sunny said, or she thought, oh, I didn't know what to say to that. I have a few things that I would like to say to that.
Bitch, shut the fuck up.
But anyway, I'm getting fired up, if you can tell. So I'm gonna have to reel it back in. The other moment that really frustrated me was this discussion by Virgil, who I forgot to tell you, but he is basically the best friend and stylist of Opal, who defends her to the end, which, I can respect to a point. However, he then says, you can't imagine how many people she's helped. Which, oh my gosh, story old as time. Do you know how many great men and women in history have helped so many people, and yet they were still jerks, douchebags, assholes, selfish individuals? I mean, Alexander Hamilton has an entire musical dedicated to the great things he did. And on top of that, though, they still found time to dedicate a few songs to his infidelity. Like, come on. We don't have to put people on such high pedestals when we realize that they are great characters. It's fine if they're a great character. I just hate it when it's shoved down my throat, and then I start to root against the person, to be honest. And on top of that, all of the old transgressions that Opal, participated in, it seems like she hasn't learned anything later in life, because she then basically betrays Sunny in a moment where Sunny really needed her to back her up, and Opal sides with Nev, the person who's like someone we aren't supposed to like either. So that really, I was like, okay, well, in that case,
I hope the whole city burns.
There was a redeeming moment where when the mother of Sunny does come into the conversation, and the way they were talking, I had a moment where I was thinking, is this book gonna turn around in my favor? Am I going to end up loving this book if it ends the way I'm hoping it does? And unfortunately it didn't. So I don't want to be too harsh in my rating of this book, and I'm sure some people are gonna think I am harsh, but I am giving this book 2 stars. And for me, it means that it wasn't for me. That might be a cop-out, but the fact is, I know that some people did really enjoy this book. My friend Phoebe, who read it just before me, she enjoyed it and found it really fascinating. So I'm not saying this book doesn't have any merit. I also want to acknowledge that one of my favorite YouTubers, Cindy from With Cindy, in her 2021 wrap-up did mention that when it comes to a book by a person of color or from any other marginal group, if she knows she's not going to like it, she usually tries to DNF it so that she doesn't have to rate it and hurt its ratings on sites like Goodreads or Storygraph. And when I watched that video, I had already written a review and marked it as 2 stars on those sites for me. But I do think going forward, I'm going to be a bit more conscious about it, especially for books by marginalized groups, because in the book industry, we know that they already don't have a big enough space as they deserve. And I definitely want to make sure that I am conscious of it moving forward. And I really appreciated the fact that Cindy was so open about that idea, and it encouraged me to make sure that I do the same when I can. The problem with this situation was just that my friend wanted me to get to the end, and by that point I did as well. So food for thought, though, when it comes to future books and how I'm gonna rate them. Wow! Okay, after that downer, I'm also a bit worried that I did end up ranting about it, so maybe I should have just done a video vlog. I don't know. So the second book that I'm going to follow that one with is Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde, and I loved this book. I specifically picked it after Opal and Nev because I wanted to get a book that I felt certain would be 5 stars, and it was. This is definitely a 5-star read, and I think that this is material that everybody should read. If we were in a perfect world, everyone would be a feminist and they would get so much out of this book. My favorite essay was probably The Uses for Anger. However, I also loved that at least 2 of the essays that I can remember were responses to other activists, and she was scolding them and ripping them a new one, for at least for one of them, about their views on equality and how their views on Black women or lack thereof really harms the discussion and progress when it comes to feminism and civil rights. One of the activists that she claps back at is Robert Staples, a well-known activist for Black rights, specifically the Black man. She responds to him after he says that there's no such thing as the Black macho man, and this is a conspiracy of sorts created by extreme Black feminists, which is just so frustrating. But the way that she responds to it is so great. In one of his papers, he said, the Black man needs to be careful or aware because the Black woman may then surpass him in regards to like jobs and education and all of these other economic and societal systems. And Lord responds saying, so you're admitting that we are currently more marginalized than the Black man. Like, that's basically what you're saying, is that you are aware that we have less rights as Black women than Black men do. And you're saying you want to keep it that way. And she's just, oh my gosh, just the way she talks is amazing. And the way that she opens your eyes, especially when we know that privilege is invisible to those who have it. And that goes into the next essay that I'm going to discuss. And it was her response to a book by Mary Daly, or Daly. I'm really not sure how to say her last name, but she also was a feminist activist and philosopher. Lord basically responds to her book saying, quite politely, in my opinion, that she failed to really cover Black women and other women of color in an appropriate light. The only times that she does mention these women is as victims, and then she really only discusses feminism in regards to the white woman's perspective. And as a woman who's white, I really appreciated how this book basically made sure that I remained aware that my situation, while I'm fighting for the same idea of equality and feminism for all, my perspective in no way matches that of the Black woman, of the LGBT plus member, or any other person of color or marginalized group of people. And so while we may be fighting for the same thing, my struggle isn't the same, and that's something that I need to remain conscious of. I may not necessarily understand, because it's quite hard and almost disrespectful at times to say you understand the struggles of another person, but I really appreciated that this book basically encourages being conscious of the fact that equality looks different to other people, and just as much as inequality looks different to other people. And I actually started to tear up because of the last essay. So this is a phenomenal book. I highly recommend that you check out her poetry as well. But if you want a good introduction to her and you're not really someone who gravitates towards poetry, then this book of essays and speeches is honestly the best choice you can probably make. Highly recommend it. I was about to grab one of my physical books, but then I remembered that the third book I finished was actually an ebook from NetGalley. So the third book I ended up reading was Villainy in Vienna by Kelly Oliver. This is the third installment in the Fiona Figg mystery series. So I haven't read books 1 and 2, but I can say that I actually really enjoyed book 3. I tend to really enjoy detective fiction mystery series because you usually don't necessarily have to read the books in order. Hence why if you talk to anyone who's read Dorothy Sayers or Agatha Christie or any of the other well-known writers in the Golden Age detective fiction genre, usually there's no rhyme or reason for what book you pick up, and it doesn't really matter even if the detective is a recurring character, because the individual mystery should be self-sustaining. I was surprised by how much I liked this book, especially because I usually am not a fan of books written by modern authors in the cozy mystery genre. I could go on for another rant if you really wanted me to, but for now I'm going to try and keep it concise. Basically, I find modern cozy mysteries to too often use first-person narrative, and that first person is usually the detective themselves. I find it really hard for that to be pulled off well, especially since it's so common that our first-person detective is an amateur detective,
And they're quirky.
and there's some forced humor there that I just can't handle. We are inside the detective's head, so if they discover a clue, or if, you know, something clicks, you know, they're putting 2 and 2 together and it's making 4, we should see that. And I feel like it's forced into the narrative when we're seeing them figure something out, but we're not seeing it ourselves. Like, we don't actually get it until the end when it's revealed. And I'm not really a fan of that. I prefer that if it's first person, it's an observing friend or sidekick character who's watching the detective do what they do. While I'm usually not a fan of modern cozy mysteries, I think one of the reasons why I enjoyed this one was the fact that it was actually set during World War I, and to match with the atmosphere and other books that actually were published during that time, there tends to be a reserved nature to the narrator, so I think that really helped. And also, the details to what was going on politically and culturally while we were in Vienna were really fascinating and enjoyable. I felt like I was in Vienna, and I really liked that atmosphere. Versus modern cozy mysteries that are based in modern time, I just feel like there's too much going on. But yeah, with Villainy and Vienna, I really enjoyed it, and I didn't find the fact that 2 books were published previously existed, that some of their narrative kind of bled into the 3rd book. I was given enough information to understand what was happening, and I was intrigued enough to maybe one day pick up those previous titles. I gave this book 3 stars, and I know some people are going to say, oh, 3 stars, I'm not even going to try it out. But the reason why I gave it 3 stars, again, is because it's a personal rating for me, and because I'm not usually a big fan of this genre, I usually give these types of books 1 or 2 stars. So 3 stars is actually a very solid read, and it's one that I would recommend to others because there's multiple mysteries. We've got a dog napping. We have a very interesting inclusion of Albert Einstein's first wife, Mileva, who, I didn't realize this, but there's a lot of controversy about how much she helped him in his research, because she herself was a very intelligent person when it came to mathematics. So I really enjoyed that was an added conflict. And on top of that, we have this overarching arc.
Overarching. What am I saying?
We have this overarching storyline about double agents and how this assassin is in the midst, and Fiona's trying to figure out who exactly is his target. So I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was a fun read, especially if you're trying to get away and travel in a time where right now traveling isn't exactly safe or a good idea. So yeah, solid 3 stars, and I do recommend it. The 4th book that I read this month was The School for Good Mothers by Jessamine Chan, and this book honestly was so good. I went into it knowing not much, and actually, after I started it, I wondered if my description of the book was actually very accurate when I was talking about it in my TBR video, and it was. It just took a little bit of time for her to finally get into the program and enter the facility to turn bad mothers into good mothers. And I just was amazed at the social commentary when it comes to motherhood in modern times. And as this book is set in a near future, Chan is able to really get into the infrastructural problems when it comes to programs like Child Protective Services and the pressures that exist on mothers compared to fathers. And this book gives a great variety of mothers that are placed in the facility. We have women of color from a variety of backgrounds. We have women who are younger teen moms, as well as mothers who are in their 40s and 50s. We also have economic status differences, and it's really fascinating to piece together the different reasons why the women have been placed in the program, so what transgressions they supposedly took part in, and also understanding who reported them. I thought that was really interesting because sometimes it was a neighbor, sometimes it was an ex-boyfriend or spouse or a family member. It just was, or the child themselves. That was really fascinating when it was a child, as if they were threatening, saying, oh, I'm going to report you. And that was quite scary and haunting at times when you think about whether these women did what they did, or if they did, what caused it. It really messed with me. The one thing I will say, I was a bit disappointed that there wasn't a clear voice for the adoptive mother. It seems like the mother that was highlighted the most, that I could tell, was the biological mother, which I 100% understand why that would be the most dominant voice. However, I did wish that there was someone who was able to represent those who adopt children. My own mother was adopted, and the older I become, I am leaning more and more towards the idea of adoption rather than giving birth to my own children. And so I thought it would have been fascinating, especially because Chan is such a great writer, to see how she would have included it, especially when we get into the storyline where all of these women do end up kind of participating in a quasi-adoption scenario when the science fiction aspect of this book comes in. And I came in with this book not knowing this was going to happen. So if you don't want to know any more about this book and be completely shocked, then go ahead and speed ahead. I'll put a little blurb here so that you know when, a quote unquote spoiler happens. But basically, when they enter the facility, the women discover that they've been assigned these dolls, and the dolls match the race or the mixed race complexion of their own children, as well as their age range. And the mothers name these children, and they're basically told that you have a year to treat this child as your own and participate in our different scenarios and steps, so that we can assess if you will be a good mother with your real child once you go out into the real world. And I could not believe that this was what was happening in the book. I had no idea. And I actually love the relationship between Frida, who's the main character, and her doll, Emmanuel. It just, at times, it was unnerving, especially how realistic it was. But then the moments of intimacy were just honestly so touching. And it really gave me Never Let Me Go vibes by Katsuo Ishiguro. And yeah, I thought it was really, really interesting. And I was rooting for Emmanuel as well. I wanted her to have a real child's life. And yeah, this was just a great book. 20 pages towards the end, I was actually weeping. I was crying my eyes out. And I think it's just because you find yourself, you've spent so much time in Frida's head and with Frida, even though this is third person, that you're just so invested in everything that she's doing and what she's working towards that I just lost it. And my eyes, the tears were blurring my vision, and I had to stop and compose myself before I could finish the book. So if you can't tell, this is 100% a 5-star read. I'm so glad I pre-ordered it, and I don't know if there's ever going to be a time where I wouldn't recommend this to anybody. So yeah, this is a great, great book. Okay, so now we're on book 5. It's actually the last book that I finished, and so I've hit the halfway point when it comes to books that I want to read in January, which is great. And this one came in the mail. It was part of a subscription for the Mysterious Bookshop. It was another book that, because I just received it, I had only a month to finish it, so I prioritized it along with The School for Good Mothers, and this book was The Eight of Swords by John Dixon Carr. This was the first title I've ever read by him, and I've seen his name around in Golden Age detective fiction, you know, media, I guess. But I had never read a book by him before, and I really enjoyed it. I'm not gonna lie, I also just love this cover. It's so gorgeous, and it's got like the tarot card, which of course matches the title, and yeah, I really do appreciate these Otto Penzler Presents American Mystery Classics editions, and I can see myself slowly collecting them, especially if they end up being as good as this one. This book was a 4-star read, and I was just so pleasantly surprised. I really enjoyed the chaos that ensued. With every chapter, I felt like the mystery became more complicated and turned a different way than I was anticipating. Basically, we have a bishop sliding down banisters. We have a known poltergeist in the house as well. We have this mysterious mobster Italian, American Italian, who's suddenly in this English countryside, who supposedly is, you know, wanted and assumed to be the murderer, when it's like, where is he coming from? And then, of course, we do have the murder that happens, and it occurs in the guest house of the estate, where a man is found with a bullet in his head. And so there's just like all this craziness. And on top of that, he's found with the tarot card in his hand on the desk where he, you know, his body's found. So then that's going on. And there's also multiple people who are playing detective, some who are more legitimate than others. One of them is a detective fiction writer, and it's quite funny because the fact that he's in this narrative allows the characters to play around with a little metafiction and be self-aware that they themselves are in a detective mystery. And I love especially when the writer discusses the idea of what's a probable versus improbable mystery, especially since, you know, Golden Age detective fiction is known for having a lot of absurd, crazy, unique mysteries, you know, locked room mysteries, transit mysteries, murders done by multiple people. So this was very fun and light, and just acknowledging those different aspects within the narrative and within the genre. And so I really enjoyed it, and I hope to read another book by him soon. I currently think I do own one. I'd have to look for it though, and I don't know which one it is. But yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised, and it was a great book to end just before I made this video. So yeah, 4 stars, and I definitely recommend it to anyone who's a fan of Agatha Christie, Dorothy Sayers, Arthur Conan Doyle, any of the big names. He's definitely in that wheelhouse too. Thank you guys so much for spending some of your day with me. I hope that you enjoyed some of my ranting, as well as some of my highly, highly recommended titles that I did end up finishing in the first half of January. I hope that you guys really enjoyed the video and it inspired you to maybe look at those books if they're on your shelves. And if you did, give it a like, give it a subscribe, and then you'll be getting notifications every time a video like this pops up. I really appreciate you spending some of your day with me, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye guys! Like and subscribe. Wow!